Hello, and welcome back to the Make Yourself Magic podcast. Before we get started today, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some changes I am making. But it's also hard to tell you about them because I don't know what they're going to be yet. I have just been under the very clear realization that it is time for me to evolve in some way in my career professionally. And in part in the way that I present information in this podcast. So, not much is going to change in reality, except I will probably change the name of the podcast. And for those of you who have been faithful listeners from the beginning, first of all, thank you. And you may have to brace yourselves for quite a little ebb and flow when it comes to the way that the information comes across, the ideas, the stories. Changes are coming. I wish I knew what they were, but that's part of the fun. So today, in this particular iteration of my work and the podcast itself, I'm going to tell you a little story. Years ago, and I mean like decades, when I was in junior high, a peripheral friend approached me one February with a secret mission, or at least that's what it felt like to the 13-year-old version of me. Behind the gym lockers and with water pounding on the cold tile in the background, she confessed her infatuation with a guy we'll call Tanner, whom she desperately wanted as her date to the Valentine's Day dance. Her plan was simple. She would write him an anonymous poem every day for the 2 weeks leading up to Cupid's big day, revealing herself in the last refrains and inviting him to accompany her. She just needed a way to get the notes in his hands, which is where I came in, since I conveniently had class with him immediately after gym and just before lunch. I can't say I even remember how I felt about the task at the time, telling, perhaps. I do remember him blushing, grinning, the first day when I passed the folded paper to him as we entered home economics. Another one, he appeared genuinely surprised the following day. But as the days wore on, his reception cooled palpably. Midway through the second week, he stuck his hand out as we passed through the doorway of room 301, avoiding eye contact at all and saying nothing. Whether Tanner and Amy joined together in the blissful coupledom of adolescence, I can't say. I'm not even sure whether or not they attended the dance together. But the memory skimmed across my consciousness almost 2 decades later as I drifted to sleep the other night. I'm fascinated by dreams and memories, the way our subconscious minds can call up long-forgotten experiences and draw them out, like detectives reopening evidence boxes from old cold cases. Occasionally, it feels like they've dropped a fading photo on my desk and walked away, leaving me to sort out to which case it's connected and what new information I might glean from this relic of the past. Other times, I know exactly which case they're trying to help me solve. As I embark on my own personal mission to extract myself from the isolation I imposed on myself after my most recent breakup, I've been faced with an uncomfortable mission: to put myself out there. Not because I'm seeking love, per se, but rather because this level of isolation isn't good for me, and it is no longer serving my spiritual evolution. And I've been here before, in this place of awareness, working to open myself up, embracing all the gifts the universe might have in store for me. Specifically, 2 years after I ended the previous long-term relationship. And I remember that moment as clearly as though it were last week, watching snowflakes turn golden as they fell into the yellow glow of the street lamp across from me, smoking a cigarette at 3 a.m. in an effort to put myself back to sleep, and coming to the uncomfortable realization that I might have stopped believing in happily ever after. But even if that were true, I reasoned, I couldn't just go on being alone forever. I was young, healthy. Just because I couldn't imagine finding joy in a committed relationship didn't mean I couldn't just date for the rest of my life, and perhaps occasionally indulge in the carnal delights of womanhood. Some weeks later, Gary asked if he could take me out for coffee over the thunder of pneumatic drills pulling the tires off my car in his mechanic shop. I hesitated, but I was attracted to him, and he owned what I understood to be a successful business, potential to be good on paper at least. His demeanor was less than wildly enthusiastic, but that could just be contextual, I reasoned. Maybe he hadn't had a great day or had just had to tell a customer their car wasn't going to make it. Or he was low-key delirious from spending hours in the gas chamber that is a mechanic shop in February. I eventually agreed to soak up some sunshine and caffeine in his company, and a few days later we did just that. Almost as soon as I landed in the wobbly chair across from him, I knew this would be a one-time encounter. At least I hoped it would. He was actually more attractive than I remembered, until he opened his mouth. He asked a single question about what I did for a living, and for the next 80-some minutes regaled me with tales about the nightmare bitch that was his ex-girlfriend. Apparently, his melancholy was more a core personality trait than the result of extenuating circumstances. I listened for at least 40 minutes longer than I really wanted to, waiting for a break in the stream of profanity-laced belly aching before I finally just flat out interrupted him and told him I didn't feel like there was a real connection, and excused myself. "Well, I'm still interested," he said as I stood up. Well, I mean, I'm just so busy with my work, and thanks for the coffee." I didn't need to thank him for the coffee, I thought with a touch of bitterness as I walked to the car. I paid for my own damn coffee. What's more, isn't the fact that I'm not interested sufficient to close the door on any future interactions? If he's still interested, I'm supposed to squirm joyfully at his feet, tail wagging like a delighted little puppy dog. "What? You like me? Well, in that case, get yourself another coffee and let's start planning a wedding." The absurd reality, though, is that just a few years before, that's exactly what I would have done. I mean, I wouldn't have wiggled or wagged, but I would likely have given him another chance. Desperate to believe that I was lovable, my single 20-something modus operandi was undoubtedly to try to make myself love whomever seemed to show interest in me. I felt a sense of empowerment as I drove home that warm February afternoon, one that had eluded me all of my adult life. I was single, healthy, young. I could actively make a decision about with whom I spent my time, rather than idealize a man that wasn't right for me just because he seemed interested. An emboldening sensation that soon dissolved into disillusionment and defeat as I endured one lukewarm encounter after another. And those were the good ones. Then there were the drunks, or the really old guys. The worst, though, were the guys with whom I felt like I did have a magical connection, but they didn't make a move, so, assuming they weren't interested, neither did I. Or the timing didn't work out. Either way, it didn't happen, and that was maybe the saddest thing of all. Revisiting this lesson now, 10 years after my first bad date, in the early years of midlife, has a disquieting familiarity to it. Did I somehow miss the lesson? Only now, I'm in a third world country in which not only am I facing new iterations of insecurities that have been with me all my life, I'm also at a marked disadvantage because I know almost no one, I work from home and therefore live almost exclusively in isolation, and I'm interacting in my second language. Ideal conditions for surrender to the paradoxical temptations of either retreating even further into my personal growth, otherwise known as isolating in favor of books, or the blanket acceptance of opportunities to connect with whomever happens to be offering me their attention. Perhaps the overweight, balding owner of the local print shop, whom I guessed to be in his late 50s. Or my lawyer, who invited me to his home and to go hiking and to have a beer or a glass of wine, and in the next sentence mentioned how hard life has been for him since his wife passed. Or maybe the gaming-obsessed cool guy that chatted me up via text for hours one night, reiterating again and again how attracted he was, only to go silent the next day. Perhaps the Venezuelan immigrant who makes his living by selling candies in front of my local convenience store and gazes adoringly at me when I concede to buy him a carton of eggs. Not exactly great options. The thing is, I'm not looking for the love of my life. I'm not even looking for love, as I said. What I want, what I need, is someone with whom I am excited to spend time. Someone that I can talk to, and not about where I'm from or the challenges of learning English. Ideally, it would also be someone that I would want to kiss, and that would want to kiss me. I mean, I have a profound respect and appreciation for the sacredness of sex, but sometimes a girl just needs to be touched. All of these scenarios left me with what I consider to be the most horrifying option of all: dating apps. There are a variety of reasons why I've avoided this alternative, both when I was back in the States going through this growth cycle and now here. First of all, the whole thing just feels so foreign to me. To put my face and autobiography out there with a link to my resume as some digital version of a worm on a hook to cast about and see if it entices anyone sounds positively appalling to me. In part, probably, because I come from the in-between generation, the one that didn't have technology like the internet in our homes, let alone in our pockets. We had to rely on physically going out into the world, hoping to spark with someone that frequented the same gas station or movie rental business. The best option we had in my tiny little Midwestern hometown was to go to the mall. A group of girls would all gather at someone's home, each hormonally charged teenager emerging from her parents' car with a caboodle box full of makeup that we guarded as though it were the briefcase that contained the nuclear codes. Someone would put on some music. We'd use every outlet in the house to charge up an army of hairstyling accessories and huddle around the single 24 by 36-inch bathroom mirror. Sometimes, if we were really lucky and ended up at the rich girl's house, her mom would let us use the big hall mirror. What felt like hours later, we'd all pile into someone's parents' car, and later we'd tumble out into the mall parking lot like disoriented clowns coming out of a car, except with our hair sprayed so stiff that hurricane-force winds wouldn't have changed the style. There was never really any kind of tactic. We'd just all follow the most confident girl, who was usually also the prettiest, and hope to run into a pack of boys practicing their machismo in a place where their parents couldn't catch them. Certainly not an especially efficient tactic, but at least the getting ready part was fun, so it didn't really matter what happened afterward. That emotional safety net is long gone at my age. It isn't like I'm going over to my best friend's house to get ready for the date. In truth, the shower I took before my date with the mechanic ultimately felt like a waste of time. The point is, we had to literally put effort in, and not a little bit. We had to organize the plan, manage the anticipated feelings of girls that weren't included, scour the house for makeup our sisters had stolen, or steal our sisters' makeup, put up with the grocery store stop our mother had to make on the way to the friend's house, spend hours getting ourselves and everyone else in the group properly coiffed, and all that happened before there was even a possibility of an interaction with a boy. My generation still met people from doing things together. I met one of my early boyfriends at a roller skating rink, another at a church youth group retreat. Once, I even had a group of guys attempt to give me a phone number through the back window of their Mazda going down the highway at 60 miles an hour. These are the lengths we went to in order to meet someone and make a connection. Perhaps you can understand then why the idea of creating an amalgamation of my Facebook profile and resume for an online dating platform feels a little ridiculous. My old model for understanding the world and how to make connection with other humans, while possibly somewhat antiquated now, feels safer in its familiarity. It's more organic, I argue to myself and against supportive friends who are encouraging me to make the technological leap. Even though I realize, of course, that I've idealized this false reality in which someone physically standing next to me in the coffee shop feels a shared chemistry and is brave enough to offer his phone number. The old way just feels like it has a better chance of being real. Except, that's complete and utter bullshit. I don't think I've ever been asked out by a man with whom I genuinely felt some chemistry. Well, that's not entirely true. I once had a beautiful, semi-famous musician profess his desire for me in song, in front of everyone. I mean, he didn't write the song for me. It was already on his set list, I'm sure. But he did point his guitar at me, even sang it while making eye contact with me, told me afterward he had hoped I could hang out with him for a while after the show. I want that too, I whispered, but I'm in a relationship with someone. And then there was the absolutely stunning activist guy who desperately wanted to explore what the future might hold for us, at least until his group went back to DC the next morning, which might have been nice, except that I had to drive an hour and a half home that night, and he was staying in a group bunk situation with at least 10 other people. Then there was the guy at the hostel in Colorado who drunkenly landed in my lap and just planted one on me. He was hot and I was into it, until he passed out fully clothed in my bed. I pretended to be asleep when he finally woke up and snuck out of the room. I've got loads of those stories, the almosts, the IRL kinds of interactions between two people with shared attraction. And they didn't work. Incidentally, I find them almost more painful and horrifying. These are interactions I would actually have liked to have had. But there was always just one or a dozen little snags. A friend of mine told me it's just a matter of synchronicity. When it's the right kind of guy at the right time, it will all come together. I hope he's right, but I'm 40 fucking 2 and spending way too much time alone. Maybe it's time to give synchronicity a little technological boost. Clearly, with nearly 8 billion people on the planet and 8 million of them in the city where I live, the likelihood that I'm going to find someone that's compatible, even just to enjoy dinner and a play together, while waiting in line at the bank, is unlikely at best. Particularly because we can assume that only about half of those 8 million citizens of Bogota are men. Then when we pull out the ones who are married or already in a relationship, the ones who are far too old or far too young, the ones who are drunks or addicts or just flat out dangerous, we're getting to a pretty small number. And when we factor in the idea of shared interests, compatible belief systems, their interest in me, that percentage of those 8 million has got to be in the single digits. The likelihood that of that tiny pool of men, the ones with whom I could also have a truly enjoyable date, just happened to be waiting to pick up their dog at the pet spa, has got to be near zero. The argument for holding out for organic matchups has almost entirely lost credibility. The thing is, every time I think about the dating apps option, I feel myself shut down completely. The idea of crafting a profile and touting my mastery of my human reality feels self aggrandizing and makes me yearn for the days of passing notes in the hallway, even if they weren't for or even from me. But I realize it isn't that. I certainly don't hold that view of other people I know whom have joyfully embraced this technological advance in the world of dating. In truth, I put out all that same information on various digital platforms to make and nurture professional connections all the time. In fact, the byline I used as a freelancer mentioned my passion for the outdoors and motorcycles. Coupled with the intimation of my career as a writer, every article I've ever written could have been a pared down version of a dating profile. I still carry printed up business cards that direct people to a website that does a pretty damn good job of showcasing almost everything about who I am and what matters to me. I even wrote a book about the first half of my life. Hell, there's a documentary about it on YouTube. I mean, I didn't make the documentary, but still, none of that felt self aggrandizing. Clearly, then, it isn't a fear of exposure to the public in general either. Perhaps I could blame safety concerns for my aversion to Tinder and its ilk. There's even a thread of credibility in that one, until we look closely. Yes, I am aware that the reality that I am female makes me a statistically more likely target for precarious interactions. And yes, I understand that in a Latin American country, my blonde hair and light colored eyes make it clear to everyone around me that I'm probably not from here, and that I probably have money, or at least access to it. Reasons my dearest friend back home repeatedly reminds me to purchase some kind of keychain weaponry. Honestly, though, I've never really felt unsafe here. In truth, it's probably far more likely that I'd suffer violence of some kind in the US. At least here, almost no one has a gun. What's more, the terrible stories that come from this place are most often about people being robbed, not physically hurt. The average person here is worried about being able to eat or feed his child. He is not at all concerned with living out some kind of revenge fantasy with a stranger because women don't like him. Not to mention the fact that even if I met someone, quote, my way, the organic way, there is no guarantee that he wouldn't do terrible things. Like just because we've smiled at each other at the Pago Todo a couple of times, he feels a sense of chivalrous duty. I could never hurt this woman. I've waited in line with her 3 times. In fact, as advocates of dating apps point out, as I pointed out in a piece I wrote on the topic some 15 years ago, you're ostensibly going in with more information using the apps. Filters on the various platforms can help me weed out men who are politically oriented toward communism, or for whom the idea of visiting an art gallery is the epitome of boredom. What's more, once I have a real name, assuming they use their real name, I know, I can do some research online to verify their backstory, all of which is far more information than I had when I went to an after party with a guy I met at a bar 20 years ago. By sheer process of elimination, then, we can see that the reality of my resistance to this new way people are connecting to one another is rooted in something else, something scarier, at least for me, than all the other possibilities: rejection. If I don't put myself out there, I don't have to face the possibility that I am unattractive, unlovable, imperfect, and that is why I can't make a meaningful connection to a man, even if it's just for one date. An uncomfortable and somewhat embarrassing reality in and of itself, if I'm honest, which is exactly why I feel like I should take the plunge and do it. Face the dragon, so to speak. And really, is Tinder all that far off from Facebook? I've had loads of creepy feeling messages from random men I've never met on that platform. So I think the reality is that it's time for me to buy a teeny tiny pocket taser and start making connections. Wish me luck. If you liked this podcast and would like to keep hearing the stories of how my life in Colombia is inspiring ever deeper levels of love and growth, remember to subscribe. And if you'd like to jump in and do some healing of your own, I've got books and workshops and all kinds of other materials on my website at www.authorjacquelineLenae.com or on Patreon, patreon.com/Jacqueline Lenae. That's JACLYNLANAE. Or check out my Linktree /Jacqueline Lenae.